If you're on the autism spectrum, I think one of the main questions you might have with people is how to know the level of interest of something that you can express to them and why they are talking about the things that they are talking about, why that constitutes their interest in the world or in things. And so one way to gain sort of a gateway of understanding in this regard is to understand that everything is interesting. So I think with autism, there's a high level of focus on certain things as having a high level of interest. And so in a sense, you can do that with the entire world. You can look at the world itself, with the universe that it exists within and all of the physical rules and all of the interactions of people and objects, and you can say, wow, that's really quite interesting. It's interesting how people talk to each other. It's interesting what they're thinking about at any given time. But what I think is a challenge here is that what a lot of people are communicating when they talk to each other is information that is not novel. It is cyclical information. It's stuff that you are very aware of that people do. Like if somebody points out the weather, like, oh, it's cold today. You go, yeah, it is. But on a certain level, there's no information that's communicated there. You're both experiencing that it's cold, but it is normal to point out that it's cold. And so what might be elusive is the answer to why this is. Why is it normal to point out obvious things that are happening around us? And so to gain a deeper relationship to the world, I think it's important to understand interest and the fact that everything has interest. So if we think about the weather, there's a level of interest in that, in it being cold or hot, and you being comfortable or uncomfortable. And there's a level of interest in expressing that idea to other people. Just saying what you are feeling or saying what you are thinking at that given moment. Because what it does is it brings people into your present experience and into what of all the things that you could focus on, your mind is currently focused on. Now, the way this works in society is that the things that can be focused on are generally not structural things. They are generally more active concepts. So what I mean by this is that when we talk about structures, all of a sudden we're having conversations about how things work. That's not really what most people are interested in. They know how things work. They can just say, I need to get some lunch. They don't need to explain that they're hungry because they have a physical body that is going through these processes that is demanding them to go get something to eat, and that if they don't do it for a long time, they'll die. And so it's interesting though, because if you point something out like that to somebody, they go, oh yeah, I don't usually think about that, but it is kind of funny. Like if I just stopped doing this thing, I would die. But when you're approaching things from the viewpoint of a more autistic mind, generally I think that you are looking at systems of things that are what draws your interest. Is a certain structure is the thing that draws your interest. At least in my experience. things are more structural. You kind of live in a structural domain of thought, which is about how things are connected together, how the pieces all fit together, how the pieces play off of each other. And if you're in society in a more unconscious way in that regard, you're just not thinking about how things fit together. You only learn a system so you can do something with it. Once you learn how to turn the key in the ignition in a car and, you know, use the stick shift or the automatic transmission, and you learn how to drive, eventually you stop thinking about all of those things that you had to learn, and now you're focused just on driving. And this extends to all the different areas of society, that most people, what they've done is they've learned the mechanisms of society, so they're not focused on them, and now they just drive. They just get in the car and drive in society. And there are various habits that are associated with this, and people can develop different habits. Some of them don't work as well as others, and it's like driving a car in that regard. Some people learn it better than others do, but they have the fundamentals down. And so a fundamental is interest. It's understanding how interest works and what interest is. And so when you get people together who have shared interests, then those interests are shared pretty automatically, and they're not really thinking about sort of the minute details of how that sharing works. Because what you understand is that people are sharing their interests based on whatever is interesting at a given moment. Whereas I think if you're autistic, again, at least in my case, it's not so much that you're interested in something in a given moment, it's that your thoughts are structuring the whole world as something that is full of interest. But it's the way that you're structuring the world that is what is creating your relationship to things. It's not driven as much by, oh, now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing this. In a sense, you're always just doing the same one thing all the time, because it's a structure that encompasses all the things it connects to. So if you're in society and you're talking to people in society, you might find that what is driving your interest in that space is partly just thinking oh, how do people talk? How do they connect? What's the difference between me and them? Why are they thinking about the things that they're thinking about? Why are they sharing the things that they're sharing? And I think what's hard in that regard too, and this is why a lot of autistic people come off as overly honest, is that people have a sensitivity to subtlety in a conversation that includes sharing in a way where you are intimating at the understandings that you want to share. You're not expressing them directly. You're using suggestion. You're saying one thing and meaning another. And it's often to soften the blow of an idea, to direct somebody's mind to something without stating it overtly. These kinds of things, which can be very disorienting to be around, because if you don't pick up on these signals and these subtleties, they don't do anything for you, they don't help you, and they don't soften the blow of those ideas. They just mean that you missed the message. Or if you do get the message, then you go, well, I'm confused, why didn't they just say it outright? Why talk around it? Why not just approach things directly? And so that's an important awareness to have, is that a lot of what is being said is using implication. People are not talking about what they are talking about. Now, they can be talking about what they're talking about too. It's just that when they start talking about people, they probably won't be stating things very directly. When you're talking about events and the world, then there isn't that subtlety, like that double entendre. So all of these things though, they fit together to create a picture of a society where people are exchanging information to give their present experience. And then once that's exhausted, usually that will tie into some experience. So you'll talk about what you've been doing. You might say, hey, how's it going? This guy, it's good. Like, I haven't been doing anything. And then you might talk about something that happened. You might say, hey, did you see that this event happened in the world? Did you see that so-and-so quit? Did you see that so-and-so got promoted? Or if you don't really have anything to talk about, or you might say so-and-so got in a relationship. Or if you don't have anything to talk about on that level, you might say then, oh, hey, do you want to go get some food? Or I'm bored, let's do something. So you think you should do something. And this is where a lot of people are communicating from, is that exact space of essentially just looking for something to do. And their minds are always doing something too. It's thinking about some activity, thinking about something they'd like to do that they aren't doing, thinking about what, and this is rooted in a paradigm of work and free time, which is when you're working, you have to focus on things in a specific way that is mandated essentially by that task. And everything is oriented around tasks. If we give them to ourselves, though, then we don't call it work. But when you're in that work state, you have to do that. And then so you're waiting for that moment that you are free to do whatever you would like to do. And then when you're free, you go through the things that you enjoy. Eating, watching a movie, going to the park, talking to people, those kinds of things. And so when you're talking to people, you'll be hearing about what they're interested in. But a lot of people have trouble with that freedom if it lasts too long. They're like, well, now I need something to do. I need something to tell me what to do. And so that's what's, again, driving a lot of conversation, is just that there is this pressure place of being told what to do, and then it opens into this space of being able to do whatever you want. And because you're under all this pressure, when that opens up, there's just a bunch of things you naturally want to do, and everybody understands that. There are natural interests that are driving you at that point. Now, when you're talking more structurally, though, then things become interesting and a lot more compatible for autistic mindsets, because you can think about how stuff works and just stay on that subject, which keeps you on a specific subject. Whereas people otherwise are not on a specific subject. They're just going to wherever their mind is relative to their experience of the world, which is both conscious and unconscious. It has the quality of being something that is both something that they're aware of all the parts of and that they aren't. And in fact, everybody has a very high level of interest in the world if it's presented correctly. So people might think, oh, I'm not that interested in science, but that's only because it's not being presented in a way that naturally grabs their interest. Everybody has an interest. You live on the planet, you feel gravity, you see the stars. These things give you a natural gateway into interest if somebody can tie science to the experience that you're having by telling you something interesting. And so but the level of interest in that for most people is sort of like being an animal in the forest. Like you're like a deer, you're seeing the birds. It's interesting for the moment that you're looking at it. You're hearing the sounds of the water. You're seeing something, a person approaching in the forest. It's kind of like that. So if I tell you, when you look up at the stars at night, you're seeing light that is, thousands of years old. So you're seeing a snapshot of the past, of the light of the past. That's an interesting idea by itself. And if you trust me, then you go, oh, wow, that's very interesting. And I don't know that it's thousands of years. I don't know how long it takes for light to redshift out of the visible spectrum, but it's thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, however long it is, that it takes that light to reach us without disappearing before it does from the visible spectrum. Anyway, so if somebody is more interested in the mechanism, they might find the second part of what I said more interesting. They might want to know why that is, that the light is old that we see when we look up. But to somebody who's not that interested in understanding how stuff works, as long as they trust what I'm saying, then they might go, oh, that's very interesting to think that when I look up, I'm seeing a snapshot of the past, but it's here in the present. And the energy is here, and the energy is real, and the energy is, right now. It can cause perturbances in our instruments, including our eyes, which are an instrument on their own. So that was sort of a desultory conversation, somewhat rambling, going through a lot of different subjects. But the thing to take from this is that there are really two kinds of conversations you can have. You can talk about the mechanisms of things, or you can talk about what is happening right now. And people tend to talk about what is happening at the moment. And so they are interacting with some kind of a system, often a game system. When you're autistic and you interact with a system, you often interact with the system through the structure of the system in your mind, which you hold as a structure. And that structure you sort of have a self-identification with. But for, what would be like normal behavior would be that once you have the system, you don't need to think about its structure. You just interact with it. So once you know the rules of a game, you don't necessarily think too much about the rules, you just play the game. You might think about the rules, you might think about how to make them work better in your favor, but the rules are not the thing that you're focused on necessarily. What a normal person might be focused on is that they're thinking about the rules, but what they're really focused on is using those rules to gain an advantage to win. And so they're trying to find a way to win the game. And that's what their level of interest is in, which is very relatable to everybody. Rules themselves are not that relatable to everybody. Interesting rules are. People like learning about an interesting new rule set for a game, but just getting into rules and thinking about rules and structures is not generally that interesting because it's not the activity itself that you're engaged with. It's like thinking about gravity the entire time you're falling while you're jumping out of a plane and you're thinking about how it works. That was interesting to Einstein to think about things that way. But for most people, they're just like, okay, if I get in a plane, I can go up real high and then gravity will pull me down to earth and I'll get this feeling of rushing toward the earth, and it's fast and it's liberating when I have a parachute attached and I know I won't die, or at least I think I won't, and so it's somewhat terrifying too, but that's also kind of freeing and interesting. That shows the mindset of a person who's more engaged with what is happening, what is in the moment. And if you can imagine a mind that is just dealing in things that happen in the moment, in the present, I want to be eating, I want to be drinking, I want to be dancing, I want to watch a movie where I'm seeing this story unfold and there's this mystery of what will happen, and then the mystery is revealed of what will happen, and the mystery of each conversation is revealed in how people interact based on what they know and don't know about each other, and that surprises you as the audience. You're surprised, or you laugh, or you go, oh yeah, that character is an idiot, or that character is smart, and these things, and that structure applies to the world too. We think of the world in those terms, but putting a value judgment on what people are saying is an interactive, sort of a very present experience. And this is why people judge on a lot of levels, is that judgment creates activity. Without judgment, you don't care and there's no activity, at least not negative activity. So you might see somebody wearing a certain fashion of clothing, and if you don't judge them, you just say that's just how they're dressed. If you start to place some value on them, though, without judgment, then you go, oh, hey, I like the way they're dressed. Or if you don't like it, you just don't think about it. You might notice it if you do like it, though. But then if you start to place negative values on things, I don't like the way they're dressed, and this is why. And then there is judgment that's often attached to that, like they shouldn't dress that way. Who would dress that way? And these kinds of things, which I think for autistic minds are also very relevant concepts, because they do focus on the world through the paradigm of how things should and should not be done, again, because they are systemic ways of understanding. And so I think that's probably all I have to say about that at the moment. Again, hope that it's helpful to somebody.